When I was a schoolboy, a very long time ago, we were told a story about two well-known public schools in England. One a Catholic school, the other not. The headmasters of both schools were chatting one day, and the Catholic head asked the other one, "So how would you define the purpose of your school?" You have to remember this was long before the days when everyone had to have a mission statement. And the other head replied, "Well, that's easy. Our aim is to prepare the boys for life. How about your school?" The Catholic head thought for a moment and then replied, "I suppose our purpose is to prepare them for death." How times have changed. I don't suppose many head teachers, even of Catholic schools, would say today that the purpose of their school was to prepare children for death. Indeed, the very subject of death is one we try to tiptoe around in our society as much as possible. No doubt because, as a society, we lack any agreed sense of the purpose and end of life, let alone what happens after death. Even in the church itself, we may be tempted to feel that it's unhealthy to dwell too much on the subject of death. It might have been understandable to go on and on about death in an age when you never knew how long you were going to live, when infant mortality was high, there was no cure for many diseases. But now that medical advances give us a reasonable hope of living well into old age, our outlook is very different. And something similar could perhaps be said about the end of the world and what our faith calls the last judgment, the subject of so many wonderful but often rather terrifying paintings in the classical art tradition. In the early church, the coming of Christ was expected to take place soon. And indeed, in subsequent ages, whenever there was any portentous event, such as a plague or a comet, many people were inclined to see it as a sign of the imminent end of the world. Now, we live in a very different age, an age in which one thinker has described as, in a quite different sense, the end of history. Not in the sense that the world is about to end, but in the sense that all the dreadful things that we think of in history, particularly in the last century, caused mainly by communism and Nazism, are a historical memory for most people. We confidently await the triumph of Western democracy and Western market forces in more and more countries across the world. Our technological progress seems to ensure mankind of an ever brighter future, whatever the fears we may have about terrorism or the state of the environment. And yet to be aware of our mortality and to confidently await the second coming of Christ are in fact an essential part of our Christian faith, and always will be. Not just in this month of November, when we pray for the dead, when the falling of the leaves from the trees reminds us that we are not indeed immortal as ourselves. Indeed, at every Eucharist, the Church does not only look back to the Last Supper, we look forward to the eternal banquet of heaven, of which this sacred meal is a foretaste. So many of the prayers of the Mass, if you listen closely, ask God not just that we may do well in this life, but that we may be worthy of entering into the everlasting joys of heaven. And yet, thinking about heaven, thinking about the end of the world, is not a recipe for becoming somewhat unworldly or neglecting the duties and the joys of our work and family life. In fact, the very reverse, as the Gospel story tells us. It was the thought that the Master would one day return that gave the two good servants joy and energy, an incentive to work hard, taking risks as they traded with their talents to make more. It was the bad servant who allowed his fear of the master's judgment to paralyze him into doing nothing, lazily hiding his talent in the ground. And so it's clear that the best way to prepare for death and for judgment is to live our lives to the full in this world, putting our talents vigorously at the service of others. And we can only do that if we truly accept ourselves as the people God made us, a unique individual, as we become aware both of our own talents and indeed of the gifts that we don't have, so that we neither think too highly of ourselves nor let our weaknesses make us feel inferior to others, so that we end up hiding our talent in the ground. Think back in history to how many of the great social reforms and movements to help the poor have come from Christians who were energized in a very positive sense by the thought that one day they would have to give an account of their actions to God. Well, accountability is one of the buzzwords that we live with today. And although the thought of the Last Judgment may in some sense be a rather scary one, nevertheless, at the end of the day, we human beings are social animals. Deep down, we really want to know how other people see us, even judge us. Unfortunately, of course, the judgment of other people is very often biased. And certainly the opinions and gossip peddled around by newspapers and the media is mostly worthless. If you've ever had the experience of knowing quite well someone who is famous or at least well known, you'll realize how wrong the media usually are about them, how different most people are from the common image we have of them. And that's why the Last Judgment should also inspire joy in us, as well as a certain healthy awe, since God's judgment is utterly truthful and fair. He alone sees the whole truth about us. He alone sees through, beyond the surface to the heart, where our true intentions lie hidden from other people, indeed sometimes even from ourselves. How often, when we've made a mess of something and been blamed for it, we just wish that other people could see the good intentions that we know very well were in our hearts. Well, with God, we can be confident that He sees all that He sees the reasons why we may have gone astray, and He does His utmost to forgive, to welcome, and to heal us, so that we are able to enjoy His presence and the company of His saints forever.